Arthur Pendelton did not live in the world of ordinary men, he lived in the world of the spread. To him, life was a series of percentages, a grand ledger where the only sin was a stagnant decimal point. As the elevator of the Obsidian Tower descended from the 82nd floor, Arthur adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Loro Piana suit. The fabric felt like a second skin, expensive and impenetrable. He was 34, possessed a jawline that looked etched by a Renaissance master, and oversaw Pendelton Equity, a firm currently managing assets that could buy a small sovereign nation. His morning had been a symphony of power. He had finalized a hostile takeover of a logistics firm by 9 a.m., authorized a $20 million wire transfer for a yacht refurbishment by 10 a.m., and now, at 11:30 a.m., he felt the familiar, elitist hunger for a specific Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffee served only at a boutique cafe 3 blocks away. "I'll walk from here, Marcus," Arthur said to his driver as the heavy door of the armored Maybach swung open. "Very well, Mr. Pendelton." "I'll circle the block," Marcus replied, his voice a practiced monotone of professional servitude. Arthur stepped onto the pavement of Midtown Manhattan. He felt like the king of the concrete. People instinctively moved out of his way, sensing the aura of wealth that clung to him like a high-end cologne. He reached the Gilded Bean, a place where the baristas were as curated as the art on the walls. "The usual, Arthur?" the manager asked, flashing a smile that cost more than most people's cars. "Please, Julian." "And a bag of the reserve beans for the office," Arthur replied, leaning against the marble counter. He reached into his slim, carbon fiber wallet and pulled out his black titanium Centurion card. It was heavy, cool to the touch, and theoretically had no limit. Julian swiped it. A pause. A frown. He swiped it again. "That's odd," Julian whispered, his smile faltering by a fraction. "It's saying system error. Let me try the other terminal." Arthur checked his Patek Philippe Nautilus. "The network is likely lagging. Just run it again." Julian tried 3 different machines. Each time, the result was the same, a harsh, red declined message that seemed to scream in the quiet cafe. Arthur felt a prickle of heat at the back of his neck. This was more than a technical glitch, it was a public embarrassment. "Try this," Arthur said, handing over a secondary corporate card. Declined. A third, personal debit card. Declined. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Pendelton," Julian said, his voice losing its warmth and gaining a sharp edge of suspicion. "Perhaps you have another way to pay? It's $18.50 for the drink and $45 for the beans." Arthur felt his pockets. He never carried cash. Cash was for people who didn't have a line of credit. "I'll have my assistant call you in 10 minutes with the details. Just give me the coffee." Julian pulled the cup back slightly. "Policy, Arthur. I'm sure you understand. No payment, no product." Arthur stared at the man. The social contract of his life had just been rewritten in 30 seconds. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the coffee on the counter. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He pulled out his phone, the latest $2 model, and tapped his banking app. The screen didn't show his usual 8-figure balance. Instead, a black banner stretched across the top, "Account status, restricted." He tapped the notification. A window popped up, under the authority of the Federal Financial Crimes Division and the Office of Foreign Assets Control. All accounts associated with Pendelton Equity and Arthur Pendelton have been frozen pending a Section 402 compliance review. Access to digital assets, credit lines, and liquid capital is suspended until further notice. For inquiries, please contact your legal representative. "What?" Arthur hissed. "This is impossible." He tried to call his CFO. The call didn't go through. Instead, a recorded voice informed him that his mobile service had been suspended due to unusual billing activity. Panicked, he flagged down Marcus in the Maybach. The car pulled over, but as Arthur reached for the door handle, he realized the electronic locks weren't engaging. Marcus rolled down the window, looking pale. "Mr. Pendleton. I just got a message from the fleet management company. The car's lease has been flagged. The remote kill switch has been activated by the bank. I can't even put it in gear." "Get out of the car, Marcus." "We'll take a cab," Arthur commanded. "I can't, sir," Marcus said, looking at his own phone. "My corporate payroll card just bounced my rent payment. I have to go to the office and see what's happening. The company is in a freeze-out." Before Arthur could argue, Marcus stepped out, locked the car manually, and began jogging toward the subway, leaving his boss standing on the corner of Fifth Avenue like a discarded statue. Arthur stood frozen. He looked up at the obsidian tower. Usually, the glass facade felt like his armor. Now, it looked like a tomb. He tried to enter the lobby, but as he approached the turnstile, his biometric thumbprint scan turned red. The security guard, a man Arthur had gifted a $500 bottle of scotch for Christmas, stepped forward. "Mr. Pendleton, I'm sorry. The system has revoked your access credentials. Until the HR and legal flags are cleared, I can't let you up." "I own the building, Gary," Arthur roared. "Technically, the holding company owns it, sir. And the holding company is currently under federal receivership," the guard said, his face a mask of "just doing my job" neutrality. Arthur backed away, the noise of the city suddenly deafening. The sirens, the shouting, the roar of engines, it all sounded like predators circling. He checked his pockets again. He felt a small, crinkled piece of paper in the hidden emergency pocket of his blazer. He pulled it out. It was a $5 bill. A single, lonely Lincoln. He remembered putting it there months ago as a joke when a street magician had asked for a volunteer. It was the only physical currency he owned in a world that had just deleted his digital existence. $500,000,000 was his net worth on paper. $5 was his reality. The sky began to darken with the threat of a New York afternoon storm. Arthur Pendleton, the man who moved markets, looked at the bill. He realized he didn't know the price of a subway fare. He didn't know where to get a cheap meal. He didn't even have his house keys. They were digital, stored in an app that was currently locked by a federal encryption key. He was a ghost in a designer suit. The golden cage hadn't just cracked, it had shattered, and the shards were sharp. Arthur tucked the $5 bill into his palm, his knuckles white. "1 week," he whispered to the wind. "I just have to survive until the lawyers wake up." But as the first cold drop of rain hit his forehead, Arthur Pendleton realized for the first time in his life that a week is a very long time when you are hungry. The rain did not fall in New York City, it besieged it. By 6 p.m., the sky had turned the color of a bruised plum, and the wind whipped through the canyons of Manhattan with a predatory chill. Arthur Pendleton, a man whose wardrobe was curated to withstand the air-conditioned perfection of private jets and climate-controlled galleries, was currently soaked to the bone. His Loro Piana suit, crafted from the finest vicuna wool, was heavy with gray rainwater. The fabric, once a symbol of quiet luxury, now clung to his frame like a wet shroud. His handmade Italian leather loafers, never intended for more than the distance between a lobby and a limousine, were beginning to disintegrate. Every step felt like a squelch of failure. Arthur stood under the neon glow of a 7-Eleven on 8th Avenue. The buzzing light flickered, casting a sickly green hue over his pale face. He looked at the $5 bill in his hand. It was damp, the paper soft and vulnerable. This was his entire liquidity. In the high-frequency trading world he inhabited, $5 was a rounding error, a microscopic speck of dust in a hurricane of capital. Here, it was his oxygen. He pushed open the door. A chime rang, a cheap, tinny sound that felt like an insult. The air inside smelled of floor wax, stale cigarette smoke drifting from the entrance, and the cloying, artificial scent of nacho cheese. Arthur walked the aisles with the slow, deliberate pace of a man inspecting a wine cellar in Bordeaux. His 7-Eleven sommelier phase had begun. He reached the beverage cooler first. A bottle of premium Icelandic water was priced at $4.25. Absurd, he muttered. His brain, trained to analyze ROI, return on investment, immediately vetoed the purchase. If he bought the water, he would have 75 cents left. He couldn't eat 75 cents. He moved to the generic brand. $1.25. Better. He grabbed it, feeling the cold plastic against his palm. Next, the entrees. He bypassed the hot dog rollers. The sight of the glistening, rotating meat tubes made his stomach churn with a mixture of hunger and elitist disgust. He moved to the dry goods. A single cup of instant ramen, 99 cents. A protein bar, $2.49. A bruised banana near the register, 75 cents. Arthur pulled out a mental spreadsheet. He was a man who dealt in complex derivatives, yet the math of a $5 budget was proving to be the most grueling calculation of his career. If I buy the ramen and the water, he reasoned, his eyes darting across the prices, I spent $2.24. With tax, New York sales tax is roughly 8.8%. That's roughly $2.44. I'd have $2.56 left. If I add the banana, I'm at $3.20. That leaves me with $1.80 for tomorrow morning. He paused. His stomach growled a loud, hollow sound that seemed to echo in the quiet store. He realized he hadn't eaten since a light yogurt parfait at 7 a.m. in his penthouse. You gonna buy something, buddy? Or you just lookin' to move in? Arthur looked up. The clerk was a young man with a soul patch and a name tag that read Kevin. Kevin was looking at Arthur's ruined suit with a mixture of pity and suspicion. To Kevin, Arthur looked like a high-end lawyer who had just been dumped, or perhaps a disgraced banker on the verge of a breakdown. Both were technically true. I am evaluating my options, Arthur said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual baritone authority. It's a convenience store, not a Sotheby's auction, Kevin retorted, snapping his gum. Pick a snack and move on. Arthur felt a surge of indignation. He wanted to tell Kevin that he owned shares in the parent company that insured this very building. He wanted to explain that his current liquidity crunch was a temporary federal overreach. But as he looked at his reflection in the glass of the soda cooler, hair matted, shirt collar wilted, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, he realized Kevin didn't care. In this ecosystem, Arthur was the lowest organism in the food chain. He placed the items on the counter, the 99 cents ramen, the $1.25 water, and the 75 cents banana. Is there a microwave? Arthur asked. Over there. Hot water dispenser is next to the coffee, Kevin said, gesturing vaguely. That'll be $3.26 with tax. Arthur handed over the $5 bill. He watched Kevin take it, slide it into the register, and hand back a single dollar bill and some assorted change. Arthur stared at the coins in his palm: 2 quarters, 2 dimes, and 4 pennies. $1.74. He moved to the back of the store. He tore the plastic lid off the ramen. The dry, curly noodles looked like industrial packing material. He hit the lever on the hot water dispenser. The steam rose, carrying the scent of salt and artificial beef flavor. As the noodles softened, Arthur realized he didn't have a fork. He looked around. There were only plastic stir sticks for the coffee. Arthur Pendelton, the man who had dined on Wagyu beef in Kobe and white truffles in Alba, sat on a plastic crate in the back of a 7-Eleven and began to eat salty noodles using 2 coffee stir sticks as makeshift chopsticks. The first bite was a revelation. It wasn't good, but it was hot. The sodium hit his bloodstream like a drug, clearing the fog in his brain. He ate with a ferocity that frightened him. He peeled the banana next, eating it in 3 quick bites. He saved the water, sipping it sparingly. He was already thinking about the next 18 hours. When he finished, he threw the trash away and stepped back out into the rain. The adrenaline of the purchase had faded, replaced by the crushing reality of the night. He couldn't go home. His penthouse was guarded by a digital concierge that now saw him as an intruder. He couldn't go to a hotel, they required a card for incidentals. He began to walk towards Central Park. He needed a place where a man in a ruined suit wouldn't be bothered by the police. He found a bench under a large, ancient elm tree near the 72nd Street entrance. The thick canopy provided a meager umbrella against the downpour. Arthur took off his suit jacket, the $3 charcoal masterpiece, and looked at it. It was ruined. The structure was gone, the lining stained. He sat down and draped the jacket over his torso. The silk lining felt cold at first, but it trapped a small amount of his body heat. He pulled his knees to his chest. The city hummed around him. The distant sound of sirens, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the laughter of people in yellow cabs who still had functioning credit cards. He was surrounded by millions of people, yet he was utterly invisible. He reached into his pocket and touched the $1.74. This is a stress test, he told himself, closing his eyes. A market correction. The fundamentals of Arthur Pendelton are still strong. I just need to reach Monday. I just need to hold. But as the wind picked up, shaking the branches above him and sending a fresh spray of cold water onto his face, Arthur didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man who had spent 34 years building a fortress of glass, only to find out he had forgotten to buy a roof. He fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of numbers, long strings of zeros that danced just out of reach, melting away like sugar in the rain. The sun did not rise over Central Park so much as it bled through a thick, gray haze of humidity and exhaust. Arthur Pendelton woke with a gasp, his lungs burning from the damp morning air. His neck felt as though it had been fused into a permanent hook, and his legs were buzzing with a dull, rhythmic ache. He sat up, the $3 charcoal suit jacket sliding off his chest. It was no longer a garment, it was a testament to ruin. The silk lining was matted with dried mud and park debris, and the shoulders were permanently misshapen from his night spent curled like a comma on the wooden slats of the bench. Arthur looked at his hands. They were trembling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his remaining capital, $1 bill, 2 quarters, 2 dimes, and 4 pennies. $1.74. The absurdity of it hit him like a physical blow. 24 hours ago, he was authorizing a $20 million wire for a yacht. Now, he didn't have enough money to buy a medium latte at a suburban drive-thru. You look like you fell off a very tall building without a parachute, pal. Arthur jumped, his heart hammering. Sitting on the edge of the next bench was a man who looked like he was made of leather and gray wool. He was tuning an battered acoustic guitar, his fingers moving with a grace that suggested decades of practice. Beside him sat a plastic bucket half filled with nickels and dimes. I had a difficult night, Arthur managed, his voice raspy. The man, whose name tag pinned to a denim vest read Sal, gave a dry chuckle. In this city, difficult is the default setting. You're wearing a suit that costs more than my first house, but you're sleeping on a bench. That tells me the suit is the only thing you have left. Arthur stood up, trying to regain some semblance of his master of the universe posture. It's a temporary liquidity issue. A federal compliance glitch. My accounts will be unfrozen within the week. Sal stopped tuning. He looked Arthur dead in the eye. A week? Kid, you won't last 48 hours with that attitude. In the world you come from, money is an abstract concept. It's digits. It's section 402. Out here? Money is a tool. If you don't know how to use it, it doesn't matter if you have $5 or 500 million. You're just a target. Arthur looked at the $1.74 in his hand. What am I supposed to do? I can't even afford a sandwich. Sal stood up, slinging his guitar over his shoulder. You got the look, kid. Even in that trashed suit, you look like a guy people want to listen to. You have billionaire energy. But right now, you're trying to use that energy to feel sorry for yourself. Use it to sell something. Sell what? I have nothing. Sal pointed toward the edge of the park, toward the bustling morning traffic of Columbus Circle. Everything is for sale. Go to the discount bin at the drugstore. Buy something cheap. Sell it for more. That's all a hedge fund is, isn't it? Just with more paperwork. Arthur felt a spark of his old self flicker to life. Sal was right. A trade was a trade, regardless of the scale. He walked out of the park, his gait stiff but purposeful. He found a 99-cent and up discount store tucked between a high-end bakery and a dry cleaner. The air inside was cramped and smelled of cheap plastic, but Arthur ignored the sensory assault. He went straight to the clearance bin. There, nestled at the bottom, was a box of executive precision pens. They were knockoffs of a famous brand, made of heavy-duty plastic with a faux chrome finish. They looked remarkably professional at a glance. They were marked at 50 cents each. Arthur did the math. $1.74. He could buy 3 pens. That would cost $1.50. With tax, it would be exactly $1.64. He would be left with 10 cents. It was a 94% utilization of his remaining capital. A high-risk, high-reward play. I'll take 3, Arthur told the cashier, his voice regaining its boardroom clip. He walked out with 3 pens in a small plastic bag. He spent 5 minutes in the restroom of a nearby public library, using cold water and paper towels to scrub the mud from his shoes and smooth his hair into a sleek, professional side part. He tucked the pens into his breast pocket, the faux chrome clips glinting in the morning sun. He headed for the entrance of the 59th Street Columbus Circle subway station. This was his trading floor. The commuters were pouring out of the station, thousands of them, hunched over, checking their phones, faces tight with the stress of the impending workday. Arthur stood by the railing, not like a beggar, but like a man who belonged there. He didn't hold out a hat. He simply watched. He spotted his first target, a young man in a frantic rush, juggling a leather portfolio and an oversized coffee, looking desperately at his watch. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice projecting a calm, authoritative frequency. The man slowed down, confused by Arthur's expensive, if rumpled, appearance. "Yeah? What?" "You're heading into a meeting that matters," Arthur said, a confident smile playing on his lips. "And you're about to realize you don't have a pen that matches the quality of your signature. Don't sign a contract with a 30-cent plastic stick. Take this executive precision tool. It carries weight." The young man looked at the pen in Arthur's hand. In the harsh morning light, the faux chrome looked like polished steel. "How much?" $2, Arthur said. "An investment in your professional image." The man didn't even blink. He reached into his pocket, pulled out 2 singles, grabbed the pen, and hurried off. Arthur felt a rush of dopamine more intense than any multi-million-dollar bonus he had ever received. He had just turned 50 cents into $2. A 300% profit margin in 60 seconds. He didn't stop. He pivoted to a woman who looked like a harried executive assistant. "Ma'am, you've forgotten your backup. Never let your boss see you're unprepared for a signature." Another $2. By the time he sold the 3rd pen, he had $6 in his pocket. He immediately ran back to the 99-cent store and bought 12 more pens, all they had left. As the morning progressed, Arthur Pendelton underwent a transformation. He stopped being the victim of a federal freeze and became the CEO of the subway entrance. He refined his pitch. He wasn't selling pens, he was selling executive decision-making tools. He was selling confidence. He was selling the power of the signature. He targeted people who looked like they were part of the world he had just lost. He used their own language against them, words like synergy, optics, leverage, and closing. By 2 p.m., the sun was high and Arthur was exhausted, but his pocket was heavy. He found a quiet corner near a fountain and counted his earnings. The initial $5 had been reduced to $1.74. The $1.74 had been reinvested. After 4 rounds of buying and selling, Arthur was holding $42. He sat back against the stone wall, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. He looked at the $42. It was more than enough for a real meal. It was enough for a clean shirt from a thrift store. But more importantly, it was proof. Arthur realized that for the last decade, he had believed his wealth was the result of the system, the banks, the algorithms, the family name. But as he looked at the crumpled bills in his hand, he knew the truth. The system had frozen his money, but it couldn't freeze his mind. He stood up and began walking toward a street vendor selling hot kebabs. The smell of grilled meat was the most beautiful thing he had ever encountered. "1 lamb kebab," Arthur said to the vendor, handing over a $5 bill with a flourish. "And keep the change. It's for the service." As he took his first bite of real food in 24 hours, Arthur Pendelton looked at the skyscrapers of Midtown. They still looked like tombs, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the shadows they cast. He had $37 left, a stomach full of protein, and a plan. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was scaling. With $37 tucked into the hidden pocket of his trousers, Arthur Pendelton felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in a decade, the raw, visceral pride of a hunter-gatherer. In his previous life, $37 wouldn't have covered the tip for a light lunch at Le Bernardin. Now, it was a tactical reserve. It was power. But as the adrenaline of the pen hustle began to ebb, a new, more chilling reality set in. Arthur was no longer just a billionaire in a temporary crisis, he was becoming a part of the city's permanent shadow. The first stop on his 4th day was a Threads for Less thrift shop on the edge of Hell's Kitchen. He needed to camouflage his descent. His Loro Piana jacket was beyond saving. The salt from the rain and the grime of the park bench had turned the vicuna wool into something resembling wet cardboard. He traded the jacket to the shop owner for a crisp, albeit slightly yellowed, white dress shirt and a generic navy blazer that smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. "Keep the change," Arthur said after paying the $12, trying to maintain the ghost of his old swagger. The owner, a woman with glasses thick as paperweights, didn't even look up. "There is no change, honey. This is a business, not a charity." Arthur stepped back onto the sidewalk, buttoning the cheap blazer. He looked in the reflection of a shop window. From 10 feet away, he looked like a mid-level accountant having a bad week. Up close, his eyes were bloodshot, and the stubble on his jaw was thick and graying. He realized he was losing the Pendelton glow, that effortless radiance of the ultra-wealthy who have never lacked for sleep, vitamins, or high-end skincare. He headed toward the New York Public Library on 42nd Street. He needed information, and more importantly, he needed a digital footprint. The library was a temple of the unbanked. Amidst the marble lions and soaring ceilings, men and women sat at public terminals, their entire lives contained in plastic grocery bags at their feet. Arthur felt a pang of kinship that disgusted him. He spent $5 on a temporary guest pass for the high-speed internet. When he logged into the Pendelton equity server, he was met with a 403 forbidden error. He was locked out of his own empire. He tried his personal email. Locked. He tried his encrypted messaging apps. Suspended. The federal government hadn't just frozen his money, they had performed a digital lobotomy. He was an unperson. He searched the news for his own name. Pendelton equity under investigation, CEO disappears amidst compliance scandal. The articles were vicious. They spoke of suspicious offshore transfers and regulatory non-compliance. One tabloid had a grainy photo of his Maybach being towed, with a caption asking if the golden boy of Wall Street had fled to the Caymans. "I'm right here," Arthur whispered to the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had one card left to play, Julian Vane. Julian was a hedge fund titan Arthur had bailed out during the 2022 liquidity crunch. Julian owed him a favor of such magnitude that it was essentially a blood debt in the world of high finance. Arthur spent an hour drafting a message from a burner Gmail account. He didn't ask for money that would look like a confession. He asked for a meeting. "Julian, the optics are wrong. I'm in the city, working the back channels. Meet me at the fountain in Bryant Park at 4 p.m. Don't bring a phone." He sent it, his heart hammering. He spent another $3 on a travel-sized grooming kit, a toothbrush, a razor, and a small tin of pomade. He spent 30 minutes in the library restroom, performing a desperate act of restoration. He shaved until his skin was raw, slicked his hair back, and scrubbed his fingernails. By 3:55 p.m., Arthur was standing by the fountain. He stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back, looking every bit the man who managed $500 million. At 4:10 p.m., a black SUV with tinted windows slowed down near the park. The rear window rolled down just 2 inches. Arthur recognized the sharp, aquiline nose and the expensive sunglasses of Julian Vane. Arthur stepped forward, a smile forming on his lips. "Julian. Good to see you haven't forgotten who kept you afloat in 22. Julian didn't open the door. He didn't even look directly at Arthur. "Arthur. You look different." "It's a tactical disguise, Julian. The feds are watching the usual spots. I need a bridge loan, just 50 grand, cash and a secure line to my lawyers. My accounts are..." "Your accounts are radioactive, Arthur," Julian interrupted, his voice cold and devoid of the warmth they had shared over magnums of crystal. "I just got off the phone with my board. If I'm seen talking to you, the SEC will be in my lobby by dinner. You're not a temporary glitch, my friend. You're a pariah. Julian, I saved your firm." Arthur's voice rose, a crack of desperation showing through the facade. "And I'm grateful for that. Truly," Julian said, though he sounded anything but. "But in this town, gratitude has a shelf life of exactly 1 fiscal quarter. You're an invisible man now, Arthur. You have no credit, no access, and no leverage. You're a ghost. And ghosts don't get loans." The window rolled up with a smooth, electric hiss. The SUV pulled away, merging into the sea of yellow cabs. Arthur stood by the fountain, the spray of water hitting his face. People walked past him, businessmen in suits that cost more than his car used to, tourists with cameras, students with dreams. They didn't see Arthur Pendelton. They saw a man in a cheap blazer talking to himself at a fountain. He was invisible. The social wall was higher and thicker than any bank vault. He realized that his entire identity was built on the foundation of a digital ledger. Without the $500 million, the man known as Arthur Pendelton didn't exist. He was just another body in a city of 8 million, competing for space and air. He reached into his pocket. He had $17 left. As the sun began to set, casting long, skeletal shadows across Bryant Park, Arthur didn't head for the high-end hotels or the office towers. He walked toward the subway. He didn't go to the library to research stocks or laws. He went back to the 99-cent store. He bought more pens. But this time, his eyes weren't on the office towers. He looked at the street performers, the food vendors, and the people sleeping in the corners of the station. For the first time, he saw them not as the underprivileged or the unbanked, but as his peers. They were the ones who knew how to exist when the lights went out. He sat down on a plastic crate near the 42nd Street shuttle, a box of pens at his feet. $20 for an executive pen. A passerby scoffed. "No," Arthur said, his voice quiet but steady. $5. And it comes with a lesson on how to survive a crash." The man laughed and walked on. Arthur didn't mind. He had $17, a box of inventory, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at the ticker tape. He was looking at the ground. And he was finally beginning to understand the value of the dirt. He was the invisible man, but he was starting to see the world with terrifying clarity. The seventh day did not begin with a fanfare or a herald's trumpet. It began with the same bone-deep dampness that had defined Arthur Pendelton's week. He was sitting on a plastic crate outside a 24-hour laundromat in Queens, watching the rhythmic tumble of clothes he didn't own. He had spent the previous night in a $15 a night capsule hostel, a place that smelled of bleach and desperation, but it had provided him with a shower and a sink to hand wash his one remaining white shirt. Arthur looked down at his hands. The manicured softness of a billionaire was gone. His cuticles were ragged, and there was a faint, stubborn smudge of ink on his thumb from the pens he had been hawking. In his pocket, he felt the heavy bulge of his earnings, nearly $120 now. To the Arthur of last Monday, $120 was less than the cost of a silk pocket square. To the Arthur of this Sunday, it was a fortress. It was 4 days of food, 3 nights of shelter, and a sense of agency that no stock portfolio could ever replicate. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the black slab of glass in his pocket, the $2 phone that had been a useless brick for 6 days, vibrated with such violence it nearly fell from his hand. A cascade of notifications flooded the screen, the digital dam finally breaking. Ping. 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 Bank alert, account ending in -8804 restriction lifted. Email, urgent, formal apology from Federal Financial Crimes Division. Text, Sarah, CFO Arthur, where are you? The glitch is cleared. We're filing for damages immediately. Call me. Voicemail, Julian Vane, 3 missed calls. Arthur, buddy, let's talk about that bridge loan. I was under immense pressure when we last spoke. Arthur stared at the screen. The numbers on his banking app refreshed. Current balance, $500.042.118. He looked at the $42.118 part. The $42 was the rounding error he usually ignored. The $118 was the money he had made selling pens and skipping meals. For the first time in his life, he found the $118 infinitely more interesting than the $500 million. The $500 million was a gift of birth, luck, and predatory math. The $118 was him. A sleek, black town car, not Marcus, but a replacement sent by the firm's automated concierge, pulled up to the curb of the grimy Queens laundromat. The driver stepped out, looking profoundly uncomfortable in his crisp uniform against the backdrop of peeling paint and gray slush. "Mr. Pendelton?" the driver asked, eyeing Arthur's thrift store blazer and the plastic bag of damp pens. "I've been instructed to take you to the Obsidian Tower. The board is waiting." Arthur didn't move for a long moment. He looked at the $1.50 slice of lukewarm pepperoni pizza he was holding in his other hand. It was greasy, salty, and honest. "1 minute," Arthur said. He walked over to a man sitting a few crates down, a man who had shared his tobacco and a story about his daughter the night before. Arthur handed him the remaining $100 in cash from his pocket. "What's this for?" the man asked, startled. "A liquidity injection," Arthur said with a small, wry smile. "Consider it a seed round. Don't spend it all at the 7-11. Arthur stepped into the back of the town car. The smell hit him instantly: wealth. It was a scent of leather, ozone, and expensive silence. It felt suffocating. As the car sped toward Manhattan, Arthur watched the world outside. He saw the people on the street, the invisibles he had lived among for 7 days. He realized that from the height of his penthouse, they looked like ants. But from the sidewalk, they looked like giants surviving a storm. When the car arrived at the Obsidian Tower, the atmosphere was electric. The security guard, Gary, stood at attention, his face pale. "Mr. Pendelton." "Sir. I am so incredibly sorry about the—" "Forget it, Gary," Arthur interrupted, placing a hand on the guard's shoulder. It wasn't a condescending pat, it was a firm, human connection. "You were following the protocol of a system that doesn't know how to distinguish a man from a file. How's your son doing? Still playing baseball?" Gary blinked, stunned that the golden boy remembered a detail from a conversation 3 years ago. "Yes, sir. He's starting pitcher this year." "Good. Get him a better glove. Put it on my personal expense tab." Arthur bypassed the private express elevator and took the main one, crowded with junior analysts. They shrank away from him, intimidated by his presence, unaware that 48 hours ago, he was sleeping on a bench less than a mile away. He walked into the boardroom. Sarah, his CFO, was mid-shout into a speakerphone, flanked by a phalanx of $600 an hour lawyers. "Arthur!" she cried, dropping the phone. "Thank God. We've already drafted the lawsuit against the Treasury and the bank. We're going to crucify them for the reputational hit. The lost interest alone is in the millions. We're going to show the world that you don't freeze a Pendleton's assets without a total war." Arthur walked to the head of the table. He looked at the mahogany surface, polished so brightly he could see his reflection. He saw a man who looked older, harder, and somehow more substantial. "Drop the lawsuit," Arthur said quietly. The room went silent. The lead lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Pendelton, with all due respect, they violated every due process protocol. We can settle for—" "I said drop it," Arthur repeated. "The system had a glitch. But the glitch gave me something the firm never could, a perspective on the cost of a banana." Sarah frowned. "Arthur, are you all right? You're wearing, is that a polyester blend?" "It's a $12 blazer, Sarah. And it's surprisingly warm." Arthur sat down. "Here is what we're going to do. We're not suing the government for our lost millions. Instead, we're going to take 10% of the frozen capital $50 million, and we're going to pivot." "Pivot to what?" "Microliquidity," Arthur said, his eyes sparking with the old fire, but tempered by something new. "We're going to build a bridge for the unbanked. A fund that provides instant, no-interest survival capital for people whose lives are derailed by the very compliance glitches we just experienced. We're going to make sure that in the city, no one has to figure out how to turn $5 into a week of life using only a box of pens." The lawyers looked at each other, confused. This wasn't the Arthur Pendleton who liquidated companies for sport. "And Sarah?" Arthur added as he stood up. "Find Marcus. Rehire him with a 50% raise. Tell him the Maybach is his to keep. I'm going to start walking to the office from now on." Arthur walked out of the boardroom and headed to his private office. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the very first thing he had touched a week ago, the original, crumpled $5 bill. He smoothed it out on his desk. He picked up a sleek, $5 gold-plated fountain pen, then paused. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a plastic executive precision tool, the 50-cent knockoff he had sold to a stranger. He used the cheap pen to sign the authorization for the new fund. Arthur Pendelton was a billionaire again. But as he looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, chaotic beauty of New York City, he knew he would never be a master of the universe again. He was just a man. A man who knew exactly what a dollar was worth, and more importantly, what it wasn't. He took the $5 bill, placed it in a simple black frame, and hung it on the wall where his Harvard diploma used to be. Underneath it, he scrawled 3 words, "The Sovereign's Cost."